Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Margot and I'm here to inspire you, bring a little bit of beauty to your everyday life, and teach you a little bit of art in the process. Last video was all about my gouache painting supplies, but today we'll be talking about watercolors. Watercolors and gouache are very, very similar. I would even go as far as to call them cousins. My watercolor list is very similar to my gouache list, so I would really suggest watching that video first, since a lot of my recommendations for those will also apply for watercolors. The biggest difference between watercolors and gouache paints is the amount of opacity that they can bring you. What is opacity? So something that is very opaque means that it is not see-through. Like this book, for example. This is opaque. You can't see through it. The opposite of that is transparent. So this glass, for example, is transparent. Watercolor paints, by definition, are very, very transparent in quality, meaning the way you work with them will be very different from how you would work with gouache paints. And we'll get into that in future videos where I will get into more detail about technique and demonstrations for how to work with these different paint mediums. Let's start with the first thing, which is paper. One of the most important attributes about watercolor paints is that you need a lot of water to work with them, thus the name watercolor. And for that reason, you need paper that will be able to stand up to the amount of water that you'll be using. So for myself, I know that I really recommend the Arches, or Arches in French, Arches, watercolor paper blocks. These are terrific quality. In watercolor blocks such as this one, the sides are glued together. As you can see, I can't flip this open. That makes the paper resistant to buckling. So if you were to pour a glass of water onto paper, usually you'll see that there's this warping that will start to happen. And that can be really distracting and bothersome, and sometimes can be really difficult to paint when your paper is fighting against the medium you're using it on. So these blocks are really, really great if you're using a lot of water. And also the actual grain of this paper, the quality of this paper is terrific. I use the hot pressed paper, but they also have cold press and rough press. The difference between all three papers is that the hot press has a smooth surface texture. It's very smooth up top. The cold press has a little bit of a fine grain to it, which can be a little bit trickier to work with if you're doing a lot of detail work. And the rough press is one step further, which is like a very, very crackly surface texture. The Arches paper also comes in a lot of different sizes. So obviously the larger you go, the more expensive it will be. So if you're getting started with this, I would just stick with like a 9x12 or even a 7x10, I believe they have, so that you're still getting that great quality paper, but without that loftier price tag attached to it. There are alternates on the market. I will link some others in the description below. So if you're getting started, you're starting with a really good quality paper that will not tear or won't buckle under the humidity of the water. Next item on our list are the paints. I recommend two brands. I recommend Winsor & Newton artist grade paints. They come in a huge range of colors. And if you're getting started, it might be good to just start with one of their sets. That way you start with some of the essential colors that you're gonna need. And if you're more advanced, you could just go to the art store or go to blick.com, which is where I buy all of my paints, and just buy them by what color you like best. I feel very strongly about always working with artist grade paints. And if you haven't seen my video about gouache, I go into further detail about why my philosophy is that you should invest more on artist grade materials. I really believe very strongly that the quality of your paints will affect the quality of your art. So that's Winsor & Newton. Another brand that is a little bit off the beaten path, a lot of people don't really talk about it, but was my stepping stone to the artist grade paints, is Mijello Mission paints. These are really great paints. They're more economical. They are made in Korea, I believe. They're very highly pigmented, which means that you don't need very much in order to make your colors pop. And that's another thing that's really important to call out about high quality paints versus low quality paints. If you're using high quality paints, you actually need a lot less. So for example, if I'm creating a piece, I usually just put 1 to 2 drops, 1 to 2 dabs, tiny dabs on my palette, as opposed to squeezing out a huge amount of paint to get to the color I want. So while it may seem like you're spending a lot more for the high quality paints, you're actually using a lot less of it, and it stretches much, much further. Magello Mission also offers their own set, so if you're interested in these paints, they're terrific as well. Next up is paintbrushes. And again, here I went over all of my selections in my video about gouache, so I won't repeat them here. The only thing I will do is add to that list. So if you haven't seen that list yet, check it out and know that that list applies to my watercolor paints as well. So the only thing I would add to that list are round brushes of a larger size. And I recommend adding a number 10 or a number 12 brush so that you can get the larger washes of color and be able to work with that a little bit easier. And last but not least are mixing palettes. And I don't want to be a broken record here, but I will mention again that all of the palettes that I used in my gouache video are applicable for watercolors as well. And in fact, I use the same materials for both mediums. It's very, very practical and also very economical because I don't have to buy 2 different sets of things for the different mediums that I use. What I will add for the watercolor paints, however, in terms of palette, is a palette like this one. It's very, very helpful if you like to take your art with you, if you want to paint outdoors or on the road or anything like that. And so it folds up really practically if you're traveling, and also has these it has a little bit of both worlds. It has little wells where you can deposit all of your colors, but also a nice large surface for mixing your colors. And so this is really practical. It also has a little hole right here if you want to, I never do this, but no judgment if you do. But I don't hold my palette like this. And so that's pretty much it. If you are on the fence as to whether to go with gouache paints or watercolor paints, I would suggest that you try gouache first. And the reason for why I would recommend that first is that gouache paint can actually double as watercolor paint. Of course, there are deeper differences between the two, but if you are on the fence about it, I think it'll be more economical, and also you'll have more versatility if you start with gouache first, because you'll be able to try gouache techniques and watercolor techniques, see which one you like best, and then go from there. That way you'll be able to experiment with both mediums before settling on something that you like best between the two. So hopefully that was helpful for you. In the next videos, I will be taking you through some of the beginner basics for both gouache and watercolor so that we can start working together on building up your technique and learning how to work with these different mediums. So hit the subscribe button if you're not following me already, like this video, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.